I clearly don't have a walking deck like Megan had. But my name is Jason Sandys. I was an MVP for just shy of 12 years, and now I've been with Microsoft for about 15 months now. And I'm about to share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see that. If not, scream, holler, raise your hand, do something along those lines. Definitely, similar to the sessions before, throw your questions out in the chat, interrupt me on voice, raise your hand. There is a cool raise your hand feature that we use quite often internally. So hopefully you guys have seen that, right? Go ahead and raise your hand. And this is definitely a discussion. This is an evolving topic internally as well as externally with customers. And it's a conversation that we want to have with as many customers as we can. So I am right in the middle of a lot of this and in defining what this actually means. So that's a daunting task to begin with. So we want to really make sure that we get the messaging right for customers. And we also want to make sure that customers get where they need to be while we meet them where they're at as well, right? We don't want to leave customers behind. Not really like no child left behind, but kind of sort of, we can maybe say no customer left behind, but we always know that there's somebody that's still running Windows 95 somewhere, right? So I guess raise your hand if you're actually running Windows 95 somewhere, just so we can laugh at you. But no, seriously. Okay, so Windows 10 directory. You probably have seen some information about this floating out on the web. This has really become a big deal. Really in the past 12 months or so, clearly since we've sent folks home, or for most organizations have sent folks home, this has become a much bigger issue. Reason being that a lot of these remote type scenarios, these work from home type scenarios, only affected about 5, 10, at most 20% of most organizations. And so they were effectively niche scenarios that you could handle on a one-off basis. Clearly 15 months ago, the exact opposite happened for the vast majority of organizations, where it was literally 95% plus overnight that were remote. And all of a sudden, all of these ways that we've been doing things, right, since Windows 2000, even before that was launched, came into question, and people had to revisit how they were going to handle all of these remote employees. So huge deal. A lot of the rules, well, the rules themselves didn't change, but their implications definitely changed. And so people are having to rethink things pretty constantly. This is an evolving story as well. So there actually are a couple things that I was realizing in this slide, probably, or in this slide deck, that need to be updated. So I'll point those out as we go along. But really the precursor here, a lot of folks found these things out pretty quickly. Once again, and I'll probably say it a few times, not trying to be redundant. I think it's pretty obvious to say, but if I say it a few times, it's just because it's a key underlying premise for all of this and why things have changed so drastically recently. 15 months ago, right? It's exactly what it is. And it all comes back down to that. If that wouldn't have happened 15 months ago, basically everyone getting sent home, this wouldn't be that big of a deal to anyone. And maybe it really should be. Maybe this is, I'll never say it's a good thing, right? It's clearly not a good thing. But it's something that is helping along folks to realize that, the world is changing, and it just changed a lot faster than we thought it was going to. At the end of the day, what Microsoft was preparing as far as remote work, or really the reality of work, which was work from anywhere. We've been doing this for a while, right? If you've seen our sessions at MMS that Kim and I have done, the keynotes, or really the State of the Unions, if you've seen anything on modern work, Microsoft has been talking about modern work for 6, 7, 8 years, even potentially. Really started big time in the past 5 years, though. And modern has a lot of potentially different subjective meanings. So don't have an explicit and exclusive meaning for what modern is. However, in general, modern there's two core key concepts. It's about work from anywhere, right? So whether you're sitting on the beach in Malibu, or you're sitting, in your apartment in Manhattan, or, anywhere overseas, right? Wherever you happen to maybe, it doesn't really matter, because your office is where you're at now, right? And we all know that. Once again, past 15 months, pure and simple example of that for anyone who ever questioned that. Of course, now, once again, as a lot of organizations found out, last April, and we still get this question today, hey, I sent all of my users home. I have no idea what's going on with their devices. And as ridiculous as that sounds, sorry, not meaning to ridicule anyone, so ridiculous is probably not the right word here. Or as, to some people, as it may sound ridiculous, hey, we've kind of covered this, we've already taken care of this. We still get that question today, right? What am I going to do about all these devices that users have at home? We don't know if they're updated. We don't know anything about these devices anymore. And we can point their fingers and we can say lots of different things, but that's the reality of where most organizations, or it's a challenge that most organizations have had to overcome, right? And some still are yet to overcome. So that's where the administration piece comes in, right? So yeah, letting our users work from anywhere is great, but if those devices those users are using aren't secured and we don't trust them and we don't have a way of securing and trusting them, then we've just opened our organization up to our wonderful friends in North Korea and our friends, that live surreptitiously all over the world, really, right? Hackers are everywhere. So and clearly the state-sponsored ones are very pervasive and probably the most damaging now, but it's across the board. So it's work from anywhere and administration to anywhere, right? They go hand in hand, and that's really the core definition of what modern is. And being able to allow that for your end users, right? Once again, key over the last 15 months. The on-prem resources, we probably all have those. Most organizations still have something that you have to be on-prem for or that you have to VPN in for. Clearly, terrible over the last 15 months. VPNs, a lot of folks sent their users home saying, oh, we've got a great VPN solution, only to come to find out that, yeah, it was great when you only had 5 to 10% of your workforce remote. Now when you have 95% plus remote, that VPN solution isn't as great as you thought it was. So we don't want to have to rely on VPNs. It's just not a good thing to do, right? There's cost involved as well. Doesn't scale all the time. There's lots of problems, and we've all figured those out really quickly, unfortunately. And then multiple devices, right? Myself, I have about 5 or 6, actually now I think about it, 7 devices that I float between my 2 different identities, my personal identity and my Microsoft identity. So that's potentially a daunting task in getting data between all of those devices, right? For an end user, right? If they don't have their data on that device that they want to use, or at least access to that data, what's the use of them having that additional data or that additional device? So that's all part of modern as well, right? Working from anywhere also means you aren't necessarily carrying around a single primary device to all of those locations. So a big key here, right, about modern, about that work from anywhere, that administration to anywhere, is portability. These things all have to be portable across the board and not tied to a specific device or a specific location, right? Those are all things, once again, and like I said, I told you I was going to say it a million times because it just seems the key underlying point over the last 15 months, right? It's key. We've all seen these things firsthand, and anyone who questioned any of this stuff, just 24 months ago, I would dare say that they've all been clearly proven that their assumptions around this were false. And granted, it took a major catastrophic, unfortunate event to do that, but that's the way things were trending anyway. So, okay, some other kind of key points on here, right? Zero Trust. Hopefully everyone has heard about Zero Trust. It's a huge initiative. It's not just a Microsoft initiative. It is an industry-wide initiative. And it fits directly in with the modern world, right? Because we don't want to, going back to the example of sending all of our users home and then working on potentially alternate devices and allowing them to use whatever device that they actually have. That's great and all, but if we don't trust that device, if that device isn't secure, right, then we've just opened our organization up. So that's what Zero Trust is all about. Yeah, great, you can bring your own device, you can even use whatever corporate device you want, but we want to make sure, even with a corporate device, right, just because it was issued by your IT department doesn't make it secure. We have to have a way of making it or checking that it's trusted and that it's secure. So that's what Zero Trust is all about. Another huge key point, and this is really what a lot of the rest of this deck is about and what a lot of the churn is about right now, is that Hybrid Azure AD Domain Join. This is something that a lot of folks started doing pre 15 months ago. It was never meant to be a destination. Folks are continuing to do this now as well. It's a transient, it's a temporary enabler for cloud capabilities. If you haven't thought of taking the next step beyond hybrid, then, and I say this a lot, this is a hardcore statement. I make these hardcore statements, as most people know, to get you to think about things, right? Not to explicitly beat you up and throw stones at people, but to get you to think about things. And so the statement here is, if you haven't thought about going beyond hybrid and going full Azure AD domain join, you're doing it wrong, right? And that's purely from an engineering perspective, right? This is what Microsoft is engineering. We did not engineer hybrid Azure AD domain join to be a long-term solution for any organizations. And so there are gaps, there are rough edges. You will see hybrid as and this is a little bit maybe too much of a statement, but I'll make it anyway, because once again, it's about getting people to think about it. It's to an extent a Band-Aid over an old wound. It is not meant to be, once again, that long-term solution. You need to be thinking about taking that next step. And then, of course, don't believe the FUD, right? Just because someone says that, oh, Azure AD domain join doesn't work for them, it's most likely either a statement born out of not knowing the full details, or just not even contemplating what that really looks like in their organization. Okay, just real quick, hopefully none of this, I think it's the next couple of slides here, are new to people, particularly this one, right? Joining a domain, right? It's all about identity. It's about establishing trust, and it's a centralized identity here as well. And then, and this is an interesting one, the orange one here in the middle, and for folks who can't see that that's orange, that is orange. I honestly don't know what the full scope of color blindness is, so forgive me if I called something out that you can't see, but it's the middle one here, enforced policies. This is what traditionally joining a domain meant for most organizations. It meant group policy. Identity was really the key underpinning, right? The centralized identity, although that in and of itself was kind of just an assumption, because within the Windows world, we've always had a central identity. Well, since Windows NT 3.5, right? We've had domains, we've had that central identity. So now joining a domain meant group policy. And so that's still kind of there, kind of not there as we move forward into the modern world. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And it's about establishing trust as well. So, all three things are the reasons we do this, and we have that central location. And I always forget this is a build slide, so let me click through it. It's not a slide I actually built, but this is effectively describing the three different ways we can associate a device with Azure AD, right? So this is discounting our on-prem scenario completely. Hopefully everyone's very familiar with our on-prem Active Directory scenario. So this is talking about going through our Azure directory and getting a device identity on our devices. So the one all the way on the right, not going to talk about this one at all. If you're doing exclusively this I can definitively say hardcore, you're doing it wrong. This is meant for BYOD scenarios. This is not an enterprise scenario. The top bullet there says typically use your own device. It really shouldn't be typically. It's really hardcore. This is not meant to be an enterprise joined device. Now, there are reasons that devices are being on-prem domain joined and registered. That's a little bit of a different scenario, but if you're simply Azure AD registering devices, that's simply a BYOD scenario. But we're not going to talk about that a whole lot, because that's really not where we want folks to be anyway. We want folks to be in that middle silo. But the other thing that folks don't realize, right, they see hybrid Azure AD domain join. And they see the Azure AD domain join, and they interpret that as some type of state that device is actually associated with Azure AD. And that's a little bit of a misnomer, right? The device itself is still on-prem AD domain joined. So the key takeaway here, going back to the statement that hybrid is not the long-term scenario here, not the long-term intended scenario, is that this is not modern. Hybrid is not modern. Hybrid has an on-prem requirement. There's no getting around that it is actually an on-prem domain joined system. So, right, you can't work from anywhere necessarily now. Some of those corner scenarios, password changes, identity, authentication, some of those things don't work in the remote scenarios with a hybrid Azure AD domain joined device because it is truly still on-prem domain joined. Hybrid does not change that nature. It is simply adding the ability for that device to get a hybrid identity. So that's a quick summary there. Let me take a breath because I know there's a few comments here, and let me read through them. So the first comment from William is about organization, right? There is no specific way, or there's no equivalent of OUs in AAD. There actually is an equivalent. It's called admin units. It's been in public preview since the fall, I believe. And that's something we're building around and is going to become more mature and robust. But today, that's more or less a true statement that most people are not using admin units. There's another deficiency with admin units today is that Intune is completely oblivious to them. And so that is also work in our backlog. So it is coming. It is something that we're working on. I don't look for it in this calendar year. It's a bigger work item for sure, but it is going to happen. So yeah, Joseph was kind of answering that. It looks like that. Brian, config manager is dead. Nope, not in any form or fashion. So another key component here. And it called that out on one of those slides too. It's about on-prem resources, right? Or on-prem only resources. Config manager with the CMG in the picture is not. It's a cloud service, right? Everything that config manager can do and manage about a device can 100% be done through Azure, through Azure, right? Through a cloud service. So config manager in no way is dead here. It's not part of our engineering strategy. It's not part of our recommendations to customers whatsoever. So if you feel that you can or want to move away from config manager and move to Intune, great. Nothing wrong with that either, right? We want to meet customers where they're at. Okay, applying policies from Intune. Yeah, so going back to that previous slide, right? When we talk about the directory and the on-prem directory, why we traditionally have joined the on-prem AD domain policies, that's what Intune's about, right? So let's see here. See, we'll sync AAD groups to config manager device collection. That's from William. That's another one. That's a great one. It's one that I'm trying to push with the dev team right now. So I don't know. I need to sync with a few more devs right now and get them convinced that this is a work item they need to work on. I think most of our work items for 2107 are closed. So I failed so far on 2107, but cross your fingers for 2111, which I think will be the next one. On-prem AD is dead from Eric, kind of, sort of. We've definitely not engineered a whole lot on on-prem AD in a long, long time. Although every now and then I will see something new pop up or something that actually isn't really new, but I've never heard about before, which is always interesting. It's another one of those, I think the requirements are going to be there for a lot of things for a long time. So I don't know if it's quite dead, but it's headed that way at some point. Although there are things like nuclear submarines and nuclear power plants and places like that where on-prem is going to be the only reality for the foreseeable future. So I don't think it's going to go away completely. Okay, legacy junk. Yeah, that's kind of a are there any plans to improve on Azure Group and Azure User right back to on-prem? Keith, I guess expand on that a little bit. I don't know why you'd want to write back some of that stuff, but I guess expand on your scenarios there, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Any plans to make Intune less clunky? I'm assuming you're talking UI perspective. We have a lot of UI initiatives going on right now to clean up the interface, and we've had a lot of input on that as well. So yeah, there are initiatives around that. User voice. So honestly, the best place to be contributing information and feedback now is to use the smiley faces in the console, both Intune as well as Config Manager. User voice for Config Manager is still alive and well. User voice for some other products is still kind of sort of in use. But at the end of the day, the best place to submit feedback now is either the Feedback Hub in Windows 10 or the smiley faces in the console. And yes, Intune does have a smiley face at the top right. So. Okay, I'm going to take a break on the questions and so I can get through the slides here and we'll come back to them. So someone put a pin in the user voice URL one and we'll come back to those. Okay, next slide here. So talking about why do our devices need a cloud identity? This is one of those, right? Not necessarily all of your devices need a cloud identity. Kind of going back to my scenarios that clearly aren't for everyone. So I don't know what a percentage is. It totally depends upon your vertical. It totally depends upon how those resources are in your organization, right? Whether they actually have connectivity, whether you want to expose them or not. These are all the things that you can get with a cloud identity. There's very little difference between hybrid and full AAD as far as these go. There are some slight differences, though. I won't go into a ton of details here. But going back to the statement that hybrid isn't the long-term intended state, hybrid still can be an intermediate state, right? It is a temporary state that is completely valid. Now, that's a slightly different statement than you may have heard echoed over the last 6 months, and it's a slightly different statement than I've amplified over the last few months, but that's where we're at because we don't want to leave any customers behind. And we know that a lot of customers have taken that step to deploy hybrid in their environment. And when I say hybrid here, I mean hybrid Azure AD domain joins. So in the context of what we're talking about today, it is hybrid Azure AD domain joins. If I say hybrid, that's what that means, because hybrid can have other connotations here. But it can be a stepping stone, right? If you can skip hybrid, though, you're all that much better off. You've skipped a lot of work. There's a lot of work to get there, though. So totally up to each organization to decide what's best for them, depending upon lots of different factors. Which kind of leads, why not, right? Exactly, why would you skip? And these are some of them, right? Some of these are not necessarily huge. They're not necessarily deal breakers, but they can cause you a lot of pain. And these things are that you jump right past. There actually is another one that I need to add on here. It's a big one. It's a security one. Hopefully everyone is at least passingly familiar with pass the hash and peer movement, right, within an organization. Once you've cracked credentials on one system. Once you go to pure AADJ, that's not possible anymore because everything is based on tokens, right? We're not storing hashes of passwords locally anymore. We're simply storing tokens that are nearly impossible to replay, right? Never say impossible when it comes to security. Some smart people always figure something out at some point. But for now, those tokens are not replayable. They're not something that you can actually pass along to a peer. And circumvent the security that's in there. So security is actually a huge piece that's in here that hybrid doesn't eliminate, because hybrid, once again, is still an on-prem domain joined system, and you're still using on-prem credentials, you're still using Kerberos, you're still using those classic ways of doing a lot of things. So I think the top ones are some of the bigger ones. Another one that's kind of implicit in here as well is on-prem, right? And I've said that a few times, getting rid of that requirement to do on-prem. Anyone who's tried to do hybrid Azure AD domain join over the last 15 months, even previous when they had some remote users, discovered that, hey, this doesn't turn on right away. Why not? Oh, well, the user has to log in because that's the way it was designed, right? That's kind of one of those rough edges, potentially. Maybe there was a better way to do that in the long run if we would have known, what we know today. And oh, by the way, this actually has to contact your on-prem domain controller to finish, right? We can't just be out on the network or out on the internet and complete a hybrid Azure AD domain join. We have to have that connectivity back on-prem. Now, granted, that's a one-time only thing, but it's still a painful thing if you just sent all your users home. And oh, by the way, they either don't have a VPN client or your VPN's overloaded, et cetera, right? We can all come up with lots of different potential reasons there. There are some more in here as well. Also going back to one of my other kind of statements, right? Remember, hybrid is just not intended from an engineering perspective. We never wanted folks to be at this state for very long in their organizations. We understand why some folks are going to this state. We want to understand more, right? So we think we have a pretty good comprehensive list of gaps. If you guys have major things that are blocking you today, please reach out and let me know. Please tweet me. Twitter is going to be the best way for us to have that conversation at this point in time. We want to know. We want to make sure that it's on our list already. We're pretty sure that we have a good list, but it's always possible that we missed something. Also, keep in mind that we don't have control over every one of these things, right? One of the things that does prevent folks from going to Azure AD domain join is legacy authentication for really old apps. That's pretty painful. I actually have a slide, so I'm kind of preempting some of my my further slides here. Let me show one more slide, and I'll hop back to the questions here really quick. One of our internal resources, this is what he says all the time. because it really reflects how we feel internally on and our engineering perspective, right? You really should be trying to get to Azure AD, full Azure AD domain join as your end goal here and as quickly as possible. Okay, so let's go back up here. Where are you? Where are you? Okay, user voice. Intune reports be usable. Well, they are usable today. I guess we do have work to do on making sure they're a little more comprehensive, that they're maybe organized a little bit better. Ultimately, there's lots of work going on in reporting. Part of the reporting challenge is getting the right amount of data up as well. And so there's always challenges around that. It's another reason, kind of going back to one of the other small discussions that we have, that Config Manager is still part of our solution set, right? And part of what we want folks to do. It is very difficult for us to provide an open-ended way of reporting on anything on a device, particularly a Windows system that in and of itself is open-ended, without either incurring massive costs on our side and or impacting every other organization that is using that service as well, right? Remember, this is a shared service. And yes, Azure is crazy scalable, but that crazy scalability does come at a cost. And it's a cost that at this point we don't have a model to pass on to customers. And we're unsure, there's been lots of internal discussions around this as well, whether we truly should be passing that cost on to customers. But if we can't and we choose not to do that, that doesn't mean that we can pass on this infinite scalability that does cost us in terms of capabilities. So it's an interesting trade-off that we have here. Whereas if you continue to maintain your on-prem config manager environment, of course, putting a CMG in there to make it a cloud service, you basically do have infinite scalability, right? Or as much as you need and want to throw at it. So yeah, lots of work going on in reporting, bottom line there, but yeah, keep config manager in. So I wish Intune was managed by SCCM console. It used to, Brian. I don't know if you remember that. That was called Hybrid Intune. It didn't go so well for lots of different reasons, basically because the console itself is an on-prem component and we just couldn't update it fast enough to keep up with how fast Intune was going. So it actually turned out to be not such a great experience for most organizations. And so we've definitely standardized on having the web console. And in reality, we're going the other way, right? So tenant attach is actually exposing config manager admin functionality via the mem console, right? So, and that's where we're definitely encouraging folks to go as well. So from Keith, currently we are hybrid, still have some things that will never be moved from on-prem. So okay, that's a good point. So the message here isn't about getting rid of AD, right? You potentially will have things on-prem, right? So that's great. We're not forcing people away from that. The message here is about moving away from on-prem. Well, no, the message here is about if you can move to Azure AD domain join, great. That's where we want you to go. If your devices need a cloud identity, if your devices don't need a cloud identity, great, stay on-prem. But if they need a cloud identity, then you want to be going to full Azure AD domain join. So that's not talking about getting rid of your on-prem AD in any form or fashion, because you still may have some other resources that are there, right? This is simply about where you're joining your devices to. Okay, send a smile. Yep. Yep, Joseph, I think more or less just echoed a little bit of that. Yeah, internet is always going to be, right? It's always an assumption here, right, as well, right? Anything cloud-based, you're going to need that internet connectivity. It's, since the infamous Steve Ballmer speeches where he mentioned cloud, like, I don't know, some 1,000 times in 30 minutes or whatever, right? It's been one of those underlying maybe elephants in the room, right? You need to have connectivity. So it is what it is. A lot of organizations are, doing that. At the same time, even internally, right? Any non-trivial organization, you have your WAN links. So connectivity is always an assumption here. There's no getting around that, even for non-cloud resources, right? If your internal WAN goes down, you've got issues as well. And that is in general relying on the same ISPs, right? Because most people have outsourced their WAN infrastructure that are providing your internet connectivity back to us. So it's more or less the same story there. AS400 style stuff, yeah. Yeah, there's no getting around some of that. But at the same time now, right, how do your users today, and that's the question for everyone to pose to themselves, when you sent them home, how are they getting to that, right? Wouldn't it be a lot easier if you could expose that to the cloud in some form or fashion, provide modern auth for that as well? I think in general, the answer should be yes there, but that's for each organization to ultimately figure out how they're going to do that and why they're going to do that. Robert, not sure what you mean by DNS issues. Yep, Julie preempted my next slide, but that's okay. Lapse is being worked on. Generally, we call this cloud lapse or Azure lapse. Internally, it's been a work item, unfortunately, for longer than many people would like to have it, but it is something that we are working on and we are hoping to have. There's no publicly shareable news at this point in time, other than it is something that we know that it's one of those items on our gaps list that is preventing folks, or at least posing a roadblock for folks to move to full Azure AD main join. There are some kind of community-ish scripted solutions that you can look into. I can't say I'd recommend those, not because I have any experience or that I'm saying that they're bad. I'm just saying that from our perspective, we want an in-code solution that we're actually providing for folks to do that, right? So Azure and Intune feels like hurry up and wait, slow management system. So always remember things that are coming from Azure, particularly when we're talking about iOS and Android, have other dependencies. You have both the Google network in there. You also have the Apple push notification network in there, and both of those are throttled as well. We also have WNS on the Windows side, the Windows notification network. macOS uses the APN as well. And those are throttled. We can't just shove everything down through those, right? And everything has to go across those networks as far as communication goes. Well, not everything, but a lot of things do, particularly the initial notification. And so that's why some of those things just will never happen. Plus, we always do have the internet links in there. Once again, that's why Config Manager is still part of the picture here. Those are things that you have a lot more control over than any of these other things. It doesn't help you on the iOS, Android, macOS side, but it does on the Windows side. Lapse, device admin role, kind of sort of PIMing is kind of what you're referring to there. There are some shortcomings with that, and it doesn't actually change the password, right? That's the main piece of Lapse, is securing that password. It's not just about access. Honestly, if you're using Lapse for access, your security team probably needs to review that, because using any type of shared account doesn't provide accountability, right? So anybody who gets that password can now log in and now do something damaging on that system, and you have no idea who it honestly was. So Lapse has generally never been a good solution for that anyway. It's more about controlling what that password is so that you can rotate it on an as-needed basis, more of a break glass type scenario. Microsoft supported solution for Lapse is Intune. No, that's not really a true statement, Jesse. We are coming up with a discrete solution for Lapse, so that is in the works. Can you install CM agent during Autopilot if you enroll a client cert? Oh, yep, that's a statement from Michael. So, yep, that is a true statement. There's lots of interesting topics swirling around about that Michael was probably very familiar with some of them. So, so there's a link. Transitioning away from hybrid. So we have more collateral coming. I can't say there's a whole lot of collateral that we can give to customers today, but we are doing that. Julie posted some great links there as well as far as getting help with that. Robert posted a community link. Julie's saying, sorry for preempting my next slide, I'm sure. GPO consolidation, yep, huge task. Fault tolerance. We also have, okay, yeah, I think this is just general comment from Fenton. What's the path from hybrid to Azure AD only? That's going to be variable for every organization. Castor or Joseph asked that. Yeah, every organization has its own resources. There's no way we can explicitly dictate that. We do have a lot of things defined in the collateral that we're working on, but at the end of the day, only you know what's in your organization, right? So only you can ultimately define what those requirements are. Yeah, I just had an interview today from Robert. Yeah, yeah, I think you're just echoing what I had to say. Okay, I got to the bottom there. Good. So here's the slide that I said, right? This is the link that Julie posted before in the chat there. So this is something that we amplify as much as possible, because one of the first gaps that most organizations bring up is, well, I have all these things on-prem that my users, my AAD joined devices still need access to. And being AAD domain joined does not prevent authentication to the vast majority of these on-prem resources. And that's exactly what this link is all about. Basically, we are still able to do Kerberos authentication in a seamless fashion. So notice the SSO in the link title there. So users aren't having to enter their credentials at all. And this is all based on the user still having a hybrid identity. So once again, being real specific about what we say when we say hybrid here. So the user definitely needs a hybrid identity, but the device itself is simply AAD domain joined. And that includes shares, printers, apps that use any type of Kerberos authentication or modern authentication. There is still a whole category or classification of apps that may not use one of those. And so that's your apps, right? Those aren't our apps in general, although there are a couple of things that I know about that are Microsoft specific that don't work there. But for the most part, those are going to be organizationally specific apps, which kind of goes back to my statement. How do you get there? It depends upon those apps, what you want to do with those apps. You could, one of the mitigation pieces, and I don't remember if I have a slide in here like that, is to use WVD or potentially RDSH or some other VDI solution, right? And leave those devices or leave those VMs on either on-prem joined or hybrid joined at that point, depending upon what they need. And that's a way to get at least the bulk of your devices off of Azure AD domain joined, but it totally depends upon what you have in your organization. Okay, so totally high level here for a couple of things. We don't have a tool, right, for moving to Azure AD domain joined, so this is another challenge. Ultimately, the vision, and do take this as a vision. If you can get there, it's great. It makes everything awesome. If you can actually do what's in the middle box there, right, you can actually decouple everything from your devices, make everything portable, and I mentioned that before. So your user data, your applications, your management, your policies, you make everything, right, so a new user can pick up a new device and just start, and that device get provisioned. Maybe it's not going to be an instant process, right? Things don't magically happen. But think about it similar to you think about your iOS or Android device, right? If I go and buy a new iOS device today, right, I scan in that little swirly dot thing, whatever it is, right? And boom, everything comes down that was on that device before, right? It takes a while. It's not instant. It's not magic. But at the end of the day, I can now use that new device. For the most part, you know, each app has its own dependencies, though. Each app maybe has a different authentication method. I'm going to have to put new passwords in, things like that. But think of it as a similar scenario. If you can get there with your Windows devices, so you've moved your user data to OneDrive, you've moved your application deployment to Intune or Config Manager, right? You've moved your policies up to Intune. So now everything is effectively device independent. User gets the new device, all of that stuff flows down. A couple hours later, that user can use the new device. That's no different than that user resetting that device in place so that we can now get to Azure AD domain join. It's a scary proposition for a lot of organizations to understand because they don't always control where all their user data is, right? But that should always have been a scary proposition because that statement in of itself means as soon as that user throws their laptop in the lake because they're mad at their dog, right, their data's gone anyway, right? We can all come up with a million scenarios where that has absolutely happened in every organization where people have lost data because something about that device where they were storing data, that data only existed on that device, right? That's a bad thing to begin with. So you want to make all of this stuff portable, even if you don't have modern aspirations. And so if you continue that step and make everything about the device portable or as much as possible, a lot of work in doing this, right? That's why I say this is potentially a vision for some organizations, but there are organizations that are working their way to do this. Now, resetting that device in place so that it can be Azure AD domain joined is effectively a trivial task. I know trivial, maybe a little bit of an overstatement, but at the end of the day, right, that's what modern is all about, right? Is so that we're not depending upon that device itself or a specific user is not depending on a specific device. And of course, because that is a little bit of a scary proposition and people don't like wiping things in place, that's where hardware-based, lifecycle-based attrition comes in. What that means for a lot of organizations, right? We all cross our fingers 3 years. I don't think many organizations actually adhere to that, particularly if you're outside the US, right? Or outside of Europe. The standard, typically in US and Europe is 3 to 4 years. You get to places like South America and it's 6 to 7 years. I honestly can't say I've heard what the time frames are typically in like Africa. Asia, I think, is up there as well, usually 5 to 6 to 7 years for attrition as well. So depending upon your organization's footprint, attrition sounds great, but it could still be a multi-year endeavor for you to be able to move those devices over. A quick list of some gaps that we know, right? There's many more that are on there, right? And that's the kind of things that we want to continue to gather from folks, and we want to continue to make sure we put in our backlogs. Some of these are identity-based, some of these are Windows-based, some of these are MEM-based, right? Intune-based and config manager-based. So I'm not going to talk about a ton of these. And actually, I have a link there on the bottom that none of you can ever access. So just know that we have an internal wiki that is tracking a lot of this. This is kind of the general guidance. This is one of those slides that really needs to be updated, right? Existing systems, great. Go ahead and do hybrid Azure AD domain join, right? There's no problem with that if they require a cloud identity, because most organizations aren't going to want to wipe them. Most organizations aren't ready to be completely portable with all of their data and configuration, like I was talking about before. So great, right? As long as you have a plan for at some point resetting those devices or getting that user a new device so that it can be born in AADJ, then great. And that's where the new systems recommendation is at. Now, we also recognize there's really a third scenario. I mean, until you can prove out AADJ in your environment and you can have this complete portability, or at least portable enough, right? Don't let, I guess there's that wonderful cliche that some folks have heard, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, something along those lines. Different users in your organization, different departments, et cetera, different enclaves, whatever you want to call them, in your organization may be able to get to AADJ faster, right? So the marketing folks may only use SaaS applications. Great, right? They're perfect candidates to move right off the bat, right? And the only dependencies that they have are completely external, and so their day-to-day work is already effectively portable. Great, go ahead and move those folks, right? Those are the easy win type folks. So don't think that this is an all or nothing proposition across the entire organization. Now, does that leave you with two different sets of devices effectively in an organization, one that is hybrid and one that is Azure AD domain join? Absolutely, right? I don't think there's going to be any avoiding that. We're not going to ever flip a switch and everything magically go overnight. Even if we did have a tool that did that, it's still, right, if anyone's ever done any type of domain migration work, that's painful, right? We're always scared of losing user data here as well. So we're never going to be able to flip the switch. You're always going to, at least for some interim period, have devices in both states in your environment. But there is really a third scenario here, and that's new systems, right? Until you are ready, right? Maybe you have to do hardware-based refresh for some organization or some subset of users because their devices are 6, 7 years old, crazy old, or whatever. They're just due for new devices. But those users and the things they depend on aren't ready, right? And aren't permissive of having fully Azure AD domain join devices. Well, at that point, you don't really have a choice except to do hybrid Azure AD domain join on them. So there's really a third arrow in here, and that's new systems doing hybrid Azure AD domain join. Going back to the first statement, though, that shouldn't be the long-term right goal here, because hybrid does have so many different problems with it. Problems is not the right word, right? Rough edges, kind of what I said before, band-aids, if you will, idiosyncrasies. We can come up with a lot of potentially similar synonyms here and talk about those, but that's not the end goal here. The end goal is definitely that bottom arrow here where you get to fully Azure AD domain joined. But that could take some time, right? It's not ever going to be a light switch. So here's really the call to action, right? The other way to start doing this, and really the only way for you to do this is that first bullet that's on here. You have to start POCing this, right? Going back to, hey, do you have prescriptive guidance, or is there prescriptive guidance for moving over to Azure AD domain join? No, because once again, this is very organizationally specific. You have to know what's in your environment. You have to see what doesn't work in your environment, particularly when we get to applications, right? There are a set of resources that are pretty easy to figure out, but then there's this whole set of resources, applications, that there's no way we can help you with, because you have to know what they are first. Very similar to our app compat challenges that we had going from XP to Vista, XP to 7, 7 to 10 even to a certain extent, right? Until you actually know what's in your environment, and those once again are organizationally specific applications. And I guarantee you that everyone has had this moment in their IT career where someone came up to them and said, hey, I have a problem with XYZ. And you looked at them and you went, what is XYZ? Oh, it's the system we've used for 10 years. And you're like, yeah, we have no idea what that is, right? There's always that shadow IT, if you will, or those applications that central IT has no clue that anyone had bought. Someone went and bought with their personal MasterCard or whatever, right? They're there. And we all know they're there. So until you actually figure out what all of those things are, and that's exactly what the POC is about. You don't know until you actually try this in a production environment, very similar to, upgrading to Windows 10 to begin with, right? You could sit there and test Windows 10 with all of your line of business applications all day long, but until you're a real user doing real things on that device, none of your testing really matters, right? Because you don't have logins, you're not doing real things. Same thing here. You have to get it out into real users' hands and let them do real things for you to figure out what issues there are in your environment. And the bottom one hopefully goes without saying. It is what it is. Don't be the grumpy old man in the corner, which on occasion I am. But don't be that person. Be the person that's looking forward and be the person that says, hey, this is reality. This is where engineering is going as far as the Microsoft products go. And this is going to enable our users to be that much more productive, right? From their homes, from their mother-in-laws, when they're sitting on the beach, right? And now we can exploit our users that much more. No, so don't maybe stop before you get to that last point. But at the end of the day, we all want to be able to do this. We all want to be able to work from anywhere and be comfortable with things. So that's the call to action. I'll put up the key point slide real quick again. This is the same slide that was up before. Like I said, to definitely share gaps. We want to know gaps. That's the big thing here. We want to make sure that we have as many of these things possible covered, so that we're accounting for them in our engineering endeavors, we're accounting for them in our guidance, and that we can both meet you where you're at while at the same time drag you, if you will, kicking and screaming if necessary, to where we think you should be at, so that you can empower your users and enable your users to be successful. We all hate our users, right? But it is what it is. None of us would be here without our users. Okay, a few more questions popped up. Let's see here. Interview is the last one, I think. They're shooting their feet. Okay, we need a way to deploy to required updates and feature updates during Autopilot. That's from Jose. Yeah, that's one that gets discussed a whole lot. That's clearly not core to what we're talking about here. There's a problem with that, though, and it's a user experience problem, right? We already potentially are adding time to our user, right, from the traditional OSD perspective. Right, OSD, the goal always was to give a workable or a system to the end user where they could log in and instantly start working. It's not really the goal of Autopilot, right? It's not the goal of modern provisioning, which is what Autopilot embodies. So, there are things that clearly can come down after the fact and for the user to actually get there. So now all of a sudden, if we lump in, even quality updates have become larger on a monthly basis, but if we lump in a feature update as well, you're talking a couple of gigs of data that's now coming down to that end user who could potentially be sitting at Starbucks or could be sitting in their mother-in-law's house out in the middle of Idaho that has a 128K ISD line, right? They still exist. And now the user's sitting there for 2 days while everything's just spinning. That's a terrible end user experience, right? And that's something that we want to avoid. And while you could clearly argue, and these are some of the arguments that we have and discussions we have internally, that the user coming up on, whatever the vendor gave them, if it happened to be 1709 because it was sitting on the shelf somewhere forever, right, is a terrible user experience as well. And that's going to have to come down after the fact anyway. At the same time, the user is going to be able to start using that device, and we're always going to, or at least at this point, we've made that clear choice that getting the user usable and then having that stuff streamed down in the background so that it is just a reboot after that is the better answer here. clearly there are compliance implications. There are lots of implications there, and there may never be a good answer here. Unfortunately, it may be an answer that we're always having to work around. As far as new devices from the vendor, right, that's probably not the scenario here, but if it's a new device from the vendor and they're giving you old stuff, we do rely on our vendors, our partners, right? We love our partners in general, except for that one that starts with the big D. Sorry, Greg, but no, just kidding, of course. Just throwing shade on Greg. But, we rely on them to deliver a lot of this stuff. So, hold their feet to the fire on some of this as well. There's not much we can do as an organization. We have to count on our vendors to be good partners in this, as well as, partners with each of our organizations. So let's see here. I think I scrolled on accident here. Accounts used. Okay, so this is going off on, I will come back to that one if we have a little bit of time here. You have to do some Windows Hello configuration. Yep. Will AAD ever support a device token as AD has a computer account? So there is, I don't know all the details there, Mike. That's always a great question. There are some things that the config manager team does. And it's a great question that I need to go find out because I've had some questions around that. And the config manager developers do a lot of things that I think sometimes they get yelled at about. But they do use some type of device authentication at times, but I don't know all the details there. Let's see here. This might be of interest to you. Deploy required updates and feature updates during Autopilot. Yeah, that's effectively a way of getting it done after the fact or using a script. But right, you're compromising your user experience at that point in time. So containerize crappy old 1990s legacy junk apps, and this would be easy. Yeah. That's a bigger challenge. I can't do much about that one. Treat user devices like cows. Yeah, that's kind of part of the whole point right here, right? Too. We've said that for servers a long time. It's user devices are starting to be like that as well. Like getting a new phone. Yep, exactly. I think that's love it or hate it. That's kind of the model we're shooting for to a certain extent. I think there are times we've tilted too far in that direction because clearly if Windows was just a phone, then it wouldn't be nearly as valuable as it is, right? Windows is valuable because it isn't a phone, because it is a lot more flexible, because it has a lot more capabilities than a phone will ever have in their current iterations. And so if we go too far in that direction, then I think we've lost the plot and we start to minimize the value of having a Windows device. So charity 5 to 7 years. Yep, everyone has their own hardware attrition rates, right? Craving a cheeseburger. Come on now. Lenovo, new system. Trying to scroll here. I know we're almost out of time, right, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, we got a little bit more time.
Okay.
If you want to go through, and I can start doing some of the raffle and stuff too, if you'd like.
Yep, I'm still scrolling down. Dell is the best. Don't talk bad about them. There, you got some love there, Greg.
Nice.
Yeah, so AADDJ, not really. We never put the extra D in there anymore. We don't call it domain join. We just call it Azure AD domain. I guess we do call it. I don't know. We just always call it AADJ. So I'm sure you've been around for that. So let's hear. Okay, I'm actually always there. We'll do, Greg. Any update on mixing LOBs and Win32? Very bad experience. It's documented. So the entire point there between LOBs and Win32 is that they come down via different channels. And I know this is something that Mike's investigated as well. The problem with those different channels is they're basically asynchronous. There's no coordination between them. So if you have an LOB that runs an installer and you have a Win32 that happens to run an installer at the same time, those installers very well can conflict, and there's no way for us to know that. Typically, that's only going to happen if they're both MSIs, right? But LOBs can be an MSI. They could be an EXE that encompasses an LSI or an MSI because it's just wrapping those. And so now you have a conflict. And there's really no way for us to control that at this point in time unless we add some synchronicity to those channels, which at this point has other ramifications, right? There's always, push this way and you get pushed the other way as well, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, something along those lines. So we can't just, wave our hands and fix that one. Generally, if you just package everything as an LOB, I understand putting things as a Win32 app is a lot easier. Or sorry, I mixed that up. Putting everything as an LOB app because it's an MSI and injecting it into Intune is a lot quicker and faster. But there's a lot more flexibility generally with Win32 apps, and so that's the route most folks have gone, is just make everything a Win32 app. I don't think we'll ever see a whole lot of change there because it would require a ton of back-end engineering work that no one, I think, has any explicit desire to do. There's lots of other things that we would rather do instead. And yeah, Mike commented on that as well, right? The other problem with that is that it's sporadic. There's no way to predict that will happen because it is asynchronous. It may or may not always happen. And generally the cases we do see of it happening are only repeatable in a smaller percentage of cases. So if you run into it, then yeah, you need to change how you're doing it. But a lot of organizations do mix and never actually have the issues. It totally depends upon the installers and how they align during the installation. Okay, I think I just ran through all the questions. Let me move back to that one that I skipped though, because it's a much longer config manager one. If you configure the site for HTTPS or enhanced HTTP, a workgroup or Azure AD join client can securely access content. I think this is, okay, so that's Robert. He's just talking about accounts. I'm not sure what that was for. He was just copying from the docs and probably answering somewhere else. So if there's something else to answer there, let me know and we'll talk about that one. Okay, yeah, so, call to action, start doing AADJ, don't stay on hybrid. It's painful. Be a good citizen. And Greg will give you a big thumbs up, right, Greg? And you won't kill any angels either, so.
Yes.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah, well, lose wings, right? We didn't kill any angels today. No killing of puppies or kittens either, so just angels losing wings.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to kill anybody.
Yeah. All right, Jason. Well, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Glad you were able to spend some time with us late on a Friday. So thanks. Really good stuff.
Yeah, awesome, guys. Thank you for having me. I'm going to put my Twitter handle in the chat, just so I think that's the easiest way to have some of these conversations and for us to compile. And then depending upon the scenario your org is going through, we can absolutely start connecting on a higher level, right? Because we truly want and need that feedback to make sure that we haven't forgotten about anything.